Good morning. Today is Wednesday, July 23rd, 2025. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. God says to Moshe, Nakom nikmas b'nei Yisrael me'es ha-Midyanim. I want you to fight a war against the army of Midian, because they are the ones that had done this terrible thing to send their women to entice Jewish men. That was the end of the Parsha of Balak, and that led to the narrative of Pinchas. But what they did was very, very terrible. So I want you to go to war with them. Vayitzbu al Midian. So Moshe listened, and he gathered together the army that went out against Midian. Kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe, just as Hashem commanded Moshe. Vayahargu kol zachar, and they killed every male. Vayishpu b'nei Yisrael es neshei Midian, but they took captive, did not kill, but took captive the women of Midian, Ves tapam, and the children, Ve'ez called behemtam, Ves called mikneim, and all of their animals, Ves called chelam bazazu, and their possessions they despoiled. They took the spoils of war from Midian. So the Torah continues. Vayomer Elazar HaKohen el Anshe HaTzava Haboyim L'Milchama. Elazar the Kohen says to the people that came back from war, Zos Chukas HaTorah Asher Tziva Hashem es Moshe. This is the law of the Torah that God commanded Moshe concerning the utensils they brought back having to do with food, like pots and pans and dishes. Any cooking utensils that are made of metal, taviru be'esh v'toher. You have to kosher them by taking them through hot water, by burning them, either depending on how it was used, by immersing in boiling water or using a blowtorch to bring it to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, whatever method is needed to kosher it. And then you have to immerse it in a mikveh, because it belonged to non-Jews, now belongs to Jews. It has to be immersed in a mikveh, and then you can use it. This, of course, is the source of those halachos, that part of keeping kosher, which means that, number one, if we go to a non-kosher restaurant and we order only kosher food, we go to a non-kosher restaurant and we order fish or we order salad, let's assume that all the ingredients are kosher, which, by the way, is an assumption, but let's assume that. Since the food was cooked on utensils that previously had been used for non-kosher, the food is non-kosher, because there's a residue that's absorbed into the utensils when they're used on the fire, and when they're used for the kosher food, those remnants, that which is absorbed is released. And so there's a mixture of kosher and non-kosher, and the food is treif. Similarly, this is the reason why we need separate dishes for meat and milk. Because even though the pot is clean, and I'm going to use it for meat, but if yesterday I used it for milk, some of the particles are absorbed, and then they would get released when I cook the next day on the meat, and then it's a mixture of meat and milk. It's treif. So this is the source of these laws that require, number one, separate dishes, and only kosher utensils, and that means anything in a non-kosher restaurant is non-kosher. Okay. But there's a very curious verse that I read. Vayomer Elazar HaKohen. Elazar the Kohen says, remember, this is after Aaron died, so Elazar is the nephew of Moshe, and he is now the Kohen Gadol in his father's place. He says to the people who brought back this stuff, Zos Chukas HaTorah, this is the law of the Torah, Asher Tziva Hashem es Moshe, that God commanded Moshe. Now that's very strange. Because if God commanded Moshe, why is Elazar quoting what God said to Moshe? Why isn't Moshe saying it? The Sefer Otzer Chaim asked the following question: V'lama haraba Elazar haKohen? Why is it that these words, these laws, which are very important laws, and they're relevant to every one of us every day, why is it Elazar who is saying these laws, who's teaching these laws? Moshe heichen haya. Where was Moshe? Moshe was standing right next to him. Right next to him. And it was Moshe that God spoke to. So if God spoke to Moshe, like everywhere else in the Torah, let Moshe teach the laws. Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe is our teacher. Why is Elazar saying this? I purposefully left out a passage in the middle of this narrative. And I'll include it now. Vayitzpo Midian kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe vayargu kol zachar. They sent out the army against Midian as God commanded Moshe. They killed all the males. But vayishvu b'nei Yisrael es Shei Midian v'estapam. But they brought back as spoils the women and the children and the spoils. Here's the part that I didn't read. Vayetzu Moshe ve'Elazar HaKohen v'chol nasiei ho'eda l'krosam el michutz l'makane. Moshe and Elazar and the Nesiim, the princes of the tribes, they went out of the camp to meet the soldiers returning, the victorious soldiers returning. Vayiksof Moshe al pekudei hachoyel. And Moshe was angry at the soldiers. Vayomer aleim. And Moshe said to them, Hechiyisem kol nekeva, you allowed the women to stay alive? Hein hine hayu livnei Yisrael b'dvar Bilam. Limser mal b'Hashem al dvar poar. Vatiyam ageva b'as Hashem. It was the women of Midian that caused the problem. They seduced the Jewish men. They caused them to worship an idol. It caused a plague of 24,000 people were killed. It was the women that should have been killed. They were the ones who were guilty. Why did you leave the women alone? Vayiksof Moshe. Moshe was angry at them. And let's remember, we've discussed this several times before, this is very uncharacteristic of Moshe. We discussed before several times, even when provoked, Moshe does not respond in anger. Rashi says, Lefi sheba Moshe lechlal ka'as, since Moshe lost his temper. And by the way, he was right. They should not have left the women alive. They were the ones who were guilty. So Moshe was right in his anger. But Lefi sheba Moshe lechlal ka'as, since Moshe lost his temper, he got angry. Ba l'chlal ta'os. He came to make a mistake. Shenis alma mimenu hilchos giyulei keim. He forgot the halacha. He forgot. He did not remember what God had told him, what happens with utensils that had been used first for non-kosher food. He forgot. And that's why Elazar stepped in and he taught these laws that he had learned from Moshe, that Moshe had heard from God. What you see here is just something really incredible. Because it's not just that a person who loses their temper, they react strange, they lose their reason, They act in a way that is embarrassing to themselves. We discussed this many times. But a person who loses their temper, nis alma mimenu halacha, they will forget something important. They will slip up on something that they should have known. And remember, this is Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe, our teacher. Moshe is the one that teaches us. How is it possible that he would have forgotten what Hashem told him? He heard it directly, peh el peh, directly from Moshe, and he forgot it? That's what Rashi is teaching us. That's what this passage is teaching us. That anger distorts. Anger diminishes us. Anger makes us make mistakes that we never otherwise would have made. And then the Sefer Otzer Chaim tells the following story. This is from, I guess, the late 1800s, I think, in the town of Brisk, which was a small Jewish community, but very, very rabbinically inclined and studiously inclined. There were great, great Torah sages there. And at this time, there was a Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef of Brisk was a dayan. He was a judge in a Jewish court. When there was a bet din in Brisk, he was the head dayan. So he and two other judges, you need 3 judges to be a bezdin. He and 2 other judges were listening to a din Torah. They are listening to a case of 2 litigants. They had an argument about whatever it was. They were arguing and they came to bet din to resolve their argument. And when one of the litigants was speaking, this litigant said something using not nice words, using curse words about the person he was opposing. Kaas Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef got angry at this person. And he said to him in a harsh manner, Azuz panim, you chutzpahdik, you speak like that disrespectfully in a bezdin? We don't speak like that in a bezdin. This isn't a bar or a club or a who knows what. We don't speak like that. Say panim, say mikan. Azuz panim, say mikan. Leave. Leave. We're not listening to you. Leave. You can't stay in front of the bezdin and talk like with a foul mouth. No. Leave. As soon as Rabbi Yosef had calmed down from this outburst, he turned to the other 2 judges and he said to them, Psulani milodan obedin Torah. I am now recusing myself from this case. Find another judge to sit on this case as the 3rd judge, because I am recusing myself, I'm removing myself from this case. They said to him, why should you have to remove yourself? What you said was appropriate. He should have been kicked out for speaking in such a foul manner during a din Torah. You spoke appropriately. And Rabbi Yosef said to the other 2 judges, he said, if we learn from Moshe, who was a man of God, who heard the words directly from God, and in the moment that he had a moment of anger, Nisal Memene halacha, he forgot a halacha, and he was not able to teach, to know clearly, and to teach the laws of non-kosher utensils. If that happened to Moshe, kal v'chomer lehedyot shekamoni. Most certainly it applies to a simple person like myself. Of course, he wasn't a simple person. He was a great Torah scholar, but in relation to Moshe, he called himself a simple person. Shekol Rav Dayan, any rabbi or judge, kivin shebalach al kas, once they lose their temper, ba l'chlal ta'os, they will make a mistake. They'll forget something, they'll overlook something, they'll make a mistake. And he recused himself. Such an important lesson. And we've discussed this often, but it's necessary to repeat it and to remind ourselves of the damage we cause to ourselves when we lose our temper. Yes, of course, sometimes we have to speak in a harsh voice. But if we lose our temper, and that English phrase is so precise, when we get enraged, then we diminish ourselves. And we need to try so hard not to let that happen. But at the very least, if it does happen to us, we have to realize, now's the time that I could make a mistake. I need to recuse myself. I need to be quiet. I need to go away until I'm quiet and calm, and not do anything at this time. Because it's not just a Rav or a Dayan, a rabbi or a judge. It's any person who loses their temper, they will come to a mistake. And that's why in this passage, and it's only in this passage, Elazar is the one teaching the law, even though he's quoting Moshe. But it comes from Elazar. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.